The week I came home from my father's funeral, I was the kind of tired that doesn't show on the outside, the kind that lives somewhere deep in the chest, behind the sternum, that no amount of sleep quite reaches. I had been gone for 11 days, first to my parents' house in Ohio when it became clear there wasn't much time, then through the days of arrangements and condolences and casseroles from neighbors and relatives whose names I kept getting confused, and then through the service itself and the burial and the long, strange afternoon at my mother's kitchen table afterward, when everyone sat around not quite knowing how to leave. Marcus had driven me to the airport. He'd held my hand through security and told me he wished he could come with me. Work, he said, a project deadline that had already moved twice. I had told him I understood, and I did. That is the honest truth. I did understand, and I did not hold it against him. We had been married for 7 years. I knew how to grieve alone. I had, in fact, become quite good at managing difficult things quietly, without requiring him to rearrange his life around them. I thought that was a virtue. I understand it differently now. He picked me up from the airport on a Sunday evening in February, the kind of cold that presses through your coat and reminds you it is serious. I had 2 bags, my regular suitcase and a second one I'd borrowed from my mother, full of things she'd pressed on me. My father's old cardigan, a box of photographs, a cast-iron pot that had been in my parents' kitchen for as long as I could remember, the one my grandmother had brought from her own mother's house. Marcus was quiet on the drive home. Not distant. I want to be careful about that distinction because it matters. But careful. The way people are when they aren't sure what a grieving person needs and are afraid of saying the wrong thing. He asked about the service. I told him it had been the right kind. Not too long, the music my father would have chosen. My mother holding together beautifully until the graveside, and then not holding together at all, which felt correct. He squeezed my knee. I leaned my head against the window and watched the city go past in the dark. I did not notice, until we turned into our street, that there was an unfamiliar car in our driveway. A white Volkswagen Golf, maybe 4 years old, with a parking pass for an apartment complex I didn't recognize hanging from the mirror. I knew the car from somewhere at the edge of my memory, but I was too tired to place it in the first few seconds. Marcus had already pulled in beside it. He turned off the engine and said nothing. That nothing was careful, in a way that, in retrospect, said everything. "Whose car is that?" I said. He turned to look at me. He had the expression he gets when he has been rehearsing something, and the moment has arrived, and the rehearsal no longer feels adequate. "Nadia needed somewhere to stay," he said, "just for a little while. She's going through a lot right now." Nadia, his sister, 31 years old, separated from her husband of 3 years, currently between jobs and between apartments, in a pattern that had been repeating with slight variations since she was 24. I had known Nadia for 9 years. I knew the shape of her crises the way you know the shape of a piece of furniture you keep walking into in the dark. "How long has she been here?" I said. A pause that was half a second too long. "Since Thursday," he said. I had left for Ohio on a Monday. Nadia had moved into our home on Thursday. My husband had not called to tell me. He had not texted. He had allowed me, while I was burying my father, to believe that my home was as I had left it. I sat in the car for a moment. The cold outside pressed against the windows. Inside, our house was lit up. The kitchen light, the living room lamp I keep on the side table by the sofa, the light in the hallway that we leave on at night. All of it warm and familiar from the outside. All of it I would discover in approximately 90 seconds, rearranged. "You could have told me," I said. "You had enough to deal with." There is a particular kind of helplessness in being protected from information about your own life. It presents itself as consideration. It is not consideration. It is a decision made by someone else that your consent is less important than their comfort in the moment of asking for it. I have turned that sentence over in my mind many times in the years since. I have turned it over, and I have never found a more accurate version of it. The front door opened before we reached the porch steps. Nadia came out in socks, which is the kind of thing you only do in a home you feel completely at ease in. She was in a sweater I recognized as mine, a soft gray one I had bought in Edinburgh on a trip Marcus and I took for our 5th anniversary, that I kept on the hook behind our bedroom door. She was wearing it the way someone wears a thing they have already decided belongs to them. "You must be exhausted," she said. She hugged me. I let her. I made soup. When I walked into the living room, the first thing I saw was that the reading chair had been moved. It's a wingback, deep green velvet, that I found at an estate sale and had reupholstered twice. I had it in the corner by the window where the afternoon light falls at exactly the right angle for reading. It was now facing the television. On the side table next to it was a coffee mug I didn't own, a phone charger, and a library book with a bookmark in it that was not mine. Someone had moved my chair to face the television and made it their chair. I was standing in the doorway of my own living room, in the home I had lived in for 4 years, looking at my chair in the wrong position with someone else's things on the table next to it. And I told myself I was tired and grieving and that this was not the moment. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself I could manage a few weeks. I had managed 7 years of Nadia's emergencies from a distance. I could manage a few weeks of proximity. That was the first mistake I made. Not saying anything. Choosing instead to set the borrowed suitcase down beside the stairs, accept the soup, and go to bed in my own house, feeling like a guest in it. But before I tell you what the following 6 weeks looked like, and I intend to be precise with you, because the details matter and I wrote them all down, I need to take you back. Because what happened after I came home from my father's funeral did not begin with my father's funeral. It began much earlier. It began, if I am being exact about it, the first time I watched Marcus cancel our plans for the 3rd weekend in a row because Nadia had called and needed something. And I said nothing. And he didn't notice that I'd said nothing. And I wrote it down somewhere in the quiet part of myself as information I wasn't sure what to do with yet. Before I go back to the beginning, I need to ask you something. Have you ever come home to a space that was supposed to be yours and felt immediately that the air itself had shifted while you were gone? That someone had exhaled into every corner and left their shape in it? Tell me in the comments, I want to hear it. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please do. Because what I found in my house that Sunday night was not just a house guest. It was the result of a pattern that had been building for years, and I was finally in a position to see it clearly. Subscribe. Let me take you back 5 years. My name is Claire. I am 36 years old. I have been married to Marcus for 7 years and together with him for 9. I work in financial compliance, which means I spend most of my professional life building and reading documentation, policies, agreements, paper trails that tell a clear story about exactly what happened and when. I say this not to establish credentials, but because I want you to understand that what followed over those 6 weeks was not the reaction of someone who panics or catastrophizes. It was the methodical response of someone who recognized a pattern, documented it carefully, and waited for the right moment. Marcus is 42 years old. He is a civil engineer, which means he is extraordinarily good at reading load-bearing structures and identifying failure points in things made of concrete and steel. He is less good at identifying failure points in things made of family loyalty and old obligation.
He is a good man. I want to say that clearly and without hedging, because this story is not about a bad husband. It is about a good man who has spent his entire adult life being the person his sister calls when her own structures collapse, and who had never once asked himself whether that role had a cost, or who was paying it. Nadia. Nadia is 31 years old. She is quick-witted and genuinely funny when things are going well for her, which is the complicated truth about people who are also exhausting. The good qualities are real, they just don't reliably outweigh the other qualities. And over time, the ratio becomes something you calculate before picking up the phone. She has a degree she has never used in a field she has never returned to. She has had, since I have known her, 4 apartments, 3 relationships of varying seriousness, 2 jobs that lasted longer than a year, and 1 marriage that lasted 38 months before ending the previous autumn under circumstances that were presented to me in segments. Each segment more complete than the last, none of them the full picture. She has never been deliberately cruel to me. I say this because I think it's important to be fair, and because the cruelty, if that is even the right word, was never the point. The point always was that I did not fully exist in the space between Marcus and his sister. Their dynamic was sealed before I arrived, and I was expected to fit around the edges of it, which I had done, with varying success, for 9 years. The pattern was consistent. Something would go wrong in Nadia's life. She would call Marcus. Marcus would cancel, delay, or quietly restructure whatever we had planned. He would do this without full explanation, as though the details were a kind of proprietary information. And I would absorb the change without complaint, because I had decided early in our marriage that picking every battle was a form of losing every battle. I waited for the significant ones. What I had not properly accounted for was that in 9 years, she had never actually been inside our home for longer than a dinner. Her crises had always been managed from a distance. Money transferred, phone calls made, a couch procured through mutual friends. I had never had to share physical space with her extended need before. I did not know, until I did, what that would feel like. The first time I understood that something was structurally wrong, not just difficult, but wrong in a way that required renegotiation, was about 2 years into our marriage. Nadia had broken up with someone she'd been seeing for 8 months, and Marcus, without consulting me, told her she could come stay with us for a week. This was before we owned a house. We were renting a 2-bedroom apartment that I had specifically furnished as a 2-person home. She stayed 11 days. She slept in the 2nd bedroom. She used my coffee maker, my towels, the good olive oil I kept for cooking. She left the apartment in the same condition she found it, which was the minimum required. And she thanked us genuinely when she left. And Marcus was lighter and happier once the crisis had been resolved. And I said nothing, and put the olive oil on the shopping list, and told myself that this was what it meant to be part of a family. I told myself that many times over the following 5 years. I got quite skilled at it. Marcus's parents had divorced when he was 17 and Nadia was 9. His father had moved overseas and remained a peripheral presence in both their lives, present enough to occasionally surface with opinions, absent enough to bear none of the weight. Marcus had become, without anyone officially deciding it, the stable fixed point in Nadia's life. He paid her first month's rent on 2 different apartments. He co-signed a lease she eventually defaulted on. When her marriage started failing, he flew to see her twice in 3 months. He did all of this with a genuineness, that I could not find fault with. And I want to make that clear, because the problem was never that he loved his sister. The problem was that the shape of that love had never been examined. I had a system. I kept my distances measured. I maintained warmth without relying on closeness. I had learned, through trial and revision, that the only way to remain a sane and functioning person in this dynamic was to treat Nadia's crises the way you treat bad weather. You prepare, you wait, and you do not take it personally when it arrives on an inconvenient day. What I had not prepared for was Nadia's crisis arriving in my home, in my chair, in my sweater, during the week I buried my father. Later, much later, during the long conversations Marcus and I had after everything was resolved, I found out that Nadia had been raising the idea of staying with us for a while in the months before my father died. That she had mentioned it during phone calls with Marcus in a way he had filed under hypothetical, because he had not wanted to have the conversation with me that would have been necessary to take it seriously. That when my father's health declined suddenly in January and I flew to Ohio, she had called Marcus the day after I left and asked if now was a good time. He had said yes, without calling me, without asking. He had said yes. And she had arrived on Thursday with 2 suitcases and the white Golf and a plan that had never quite been stated aloud, which is the only kind of plan Nadia has ever made. I didn't know any of this yet, standing in my kitchen on that Sunday night, eating soup from a pot my sister-in-law had made in my kitchen with my ingredients. I only suspected it, the way you suspect something when the evidence is visible, but you are too exhausted to arrange it into a picture yet. The picture would come later. It always does, when you have had enough sleep and enough distance to see the thing whole. For now, I ate the soup. I said thank you. I went to bed, and I lay in the dark next to my husband and listened to the house settle around me and thought, this is not temporary. And I thought, I am going to need to be very careful. The first thing I documented happened on day 4. I had gone back to work on Monday. Grief leave had been 5 days, and I had used all of it. And I came home on Thursday evening to find that the kitchen had been reorganized. Not cleaned, not tidied, reorganized. The coffee supplies I kept on the left side of the counter had been moved to the cabinet above the refrigerator. The cabinet where I had kept my coffee had been repurposed for Nadia's collection of herbal teas, which now occupied 3 full shelves. The good knives, which I had specifically bought a magnetic strip for and mounted on the wall beside the stove, had been moved to the knife block on the counter, because Nadia told me when I asked, the strip made her nervous. I said nothing. I wrote it down. Day 4. Kitchen reorganized without discussion. Coffee supplies relocated. Knife strip removed from wall. On day 6, I came home to find Nadia on a video call in the living room. This would have been unremarkable except that the call was happening in the corner of the room where my desk is. A small writing desk that I keep for personal correspondence, the occasional freelance editing project, and the quiet administrative business of being a person. My desk chair had been pulled up to it. My laptop, which I had left closed on the desk that morning, had been moved to the side to accommodate her own. She ended the call when I came in and said the light was better in that corner, which it is, because I chose the corner specifically for that reason. I moved my laptop back. I did not say anything about the desk. I wrote it down. Day 6. Used my desk without asking. Handled my laptop without permission. By the end of the second week, I had 11 entries. She had borrowed the Edinburgh sweater a second time without mentioning it. She had started telling Marcus, in conversations I could hear from the hallway, that she thought she was ready to start fresh somewhere new. a phrase she used in a way that made the word somewhere feel deliberately unanchored. She had rearranged the books on the living room shelves. Not all of them, just enough that I noticed. The spines facing different directions, the order altered from the system I had maintained for 4 years. When I asked about it, she said she had been dusting and gotten confused about where things went, and she was sorry, and I said it was fine. It was not fine. But I wrote it down, and I said it was fine. She had also started referring to the second bedroom as her room. Not the guest room or the room I've been staying in. Her room. As in, I left my charger in my room. As in, would it be okay if a friend stayed over in my room next weekend? As in, a room in my house that had belonged to no one in particular for 4 years being quietly claimed by possessive language. The way you don't notice a tide coming in until you look down and your feet are already wet. Marcus didn't notice. Or he noticed and filed it somewhere he wasn't prepared to open yet. I recognized the pattern. I had been watching him perform that particular form of strategic not noticing for 9 years. Week 4 was when the pace changed. Nadia had found a job, a part-time one, 3 days a week, at a design studio she seemed genuinely excited about. This should have suggested that she was building toward leaving. Instead, it seemed to solidify her presence. She bought a plant, a large and demanding fiddle leaf fig, and placed it in the living room window. She ordered a new lamp that was delivered to our address and assembled in the corner without asking whether the corner was available. She started referring to the neighborhood as our neighborhood in conversation with the neighbors, 2 of whom mentioned this to me in the following weeks with expressions that suggested they assumed I knew what it meant. On a Tuesday evening in week 4, I was making dinner, and Marcus was in the garden, and Nadia was on the phone in the hallway. I was not trying to listen. The kitchen is separated from the hallway by a doorway with no door, a design choice I had loved for the light and now found inadequate for exactly this reason. I heard her say, in the easy tone of someone speaking to a close friend, I think I might actually stay here long term. Like, properly. Marcus wouldn't say no, and Claire is, you know how she is. She'd adjust. I stood at the stove and I held the wooden spoon, and I breathed. She'd adjust. Not, Claire might have feelings about this. Not, I should probably ask. Just, she'd adjust. As though my adjustment was a resource available to anyone who needed it, renewable and unlimited, requiring no maintenance. I went back to the dinner. I did not let anything show on my face when Nadia came into the kitchen a few minutes later and asked if she could set the table. I said yes. I smiled. I wrote it down that night, exactly as I'd heard it, with the time. The next day, I called my friend Helena. Helena has been my closest friend for 14 years. She is also a property solicitor who works in contract disputes, which I had not, until that phone call, considered professionally relevant to my personal life. I have to stop here and ask you something. Has anyone ever talked about you, your tolerance, your flexibility, your willingness to absorb, as though it was simply a feature of the landscape? As though you were a resource rather than a person? Tell me in the comments, because what I am about to tell you is the part of the story where I stopped being a resource and started being something else entirely. Subscribe if you haven't, because the next chapter is the one I have needed to tell for the longest time. I called Helena on a Wednesday morning before work, sitting in my car in the parking structure at my office with the engine off. She picked up on the 3rd ring. I told her everything, in order, starting from Sunday night and the car in the driveway and my sweater, and working through to what I'd overheard in the hallway the previous evening. I spoke without pausing and without editorializing. By the time I finished, I had been on the phone for 9 minutes, and the parking structure was completely silent around me. Helena was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Tell me about the house."
I told her. Joint ownership. Marcus and me. Purchased 4 years ago. We had what our conveyancing solicitor had called a declaration of trust. Helena's recommendation at the time, which I had followed without fully understanding all of its implications, and which I now understood with sudden and complete clarity. The declaration set out our respective shares, our rights with respect to the property, and what constituted acceptable use of the home. It also specified, Helena reminded me of this because she had written similar provisions herself, that neither party could grant occupancy to a third party for longer than 30 days without the written agreement of the other. Nadia had been in my house for 26 days.
4 days, Helena said. She's been there 26 days. You have 4 days before she hits the threshold. I stared at the concrete pillar in front of my car. Marcus never asked me, I said. There was no written agreement. No, Helena said. There wasn't. A pause. Claire, I'm not telling you to take legal action. I'm telling you to know where you stand. And where you stand is, Marcus made a unilateral decision about your shared property without your consent. And the document you both signed 4 years ago is very specific about what that means.
I sat with that for a moment. A car pulled in 2 spaces down, and a woman got out with a tote bag and went to the lift without looking at me. "What do I do?" I said. "2 things," Helena said. "First, document everything. Dates, specific incidents, exact words where you can. Keep it somewhere private. Second, call your solicitor. Not to take action yet, just to have the conversation and make sure you understand your position fully. And in the meantime? In the meantime, she said, you let her think you've already adjusted." I called our solicitor, a careful and precise woman named Patricia Osei, that afternoon. She pulled up the Declaration of Trust while we were on the phone and walked me through the relevant sections. She confirmed what Helena had told me. She also noted, without being asked, which told me she had read the document carefully and was thinking ahead, that the declaration included a dispute resolution clause requiring both parties to engage in a documented conversation before any formal process could begin. This meant that before I could invoke any rights I had, I would need to have a clear, specific, recorded conversation with Marcus about the situation. That conversation, Patricia said, is actually the most important thing. If you have it correctly, if you document that you raised the issue, stated your position, and gave Marcus a reasonable opportunity to respond, then whatever happens next is on very solid ground. And if he refuses to respond reasonably? Then you have a documented record of that refusal, she said, which is a different conversation entirely. For the next 14 days, I did what Helena had told me to do. I was warm, I was present. I watched Nadia set her second plant in the bedroom window, a trailing pothos this time, which she hung from a hook she had screwed into the window frame without asking. And I said nothing, and smiled, and added it to the document I was building in a private folder on my phone, backed up to an email account I had created on day 28 and never accessed from a shared device. Day 30. Nadia told our neighbor Kevin that she was settling in nicely and that she loved the neighborhood. Kevin mentioned this to me over the fence the following morning with the cheerful expression of someone who assumes this information is welcome. Day 32. Marcus told me during dinner that Nadia had been looking at some options for finding her own place. He said this in a tone that was designed to reassure without committing to a timeline. And when I asked what some options meant and by when, he said he wasn't sure yet. He said it gently. He genuinely believed he was managing the situation. Day 35. I came home to find that Nadia had given a key to a friend
who had come to drop something off while neither of us was home. She had given a key to my house to someone I had never met. When I asked Marcus about this, he seemed genuinely surprised that I found it concerning. He said it was just practical. She needed to be able to have people over. I said nothing. I wrote it down. Day 37. The most significant entry. I was working late and came home to find Nadia and two of her friends using the living room and kitchen for what appeared to be a dinner party.
My dining chairs rearranged, my good wine glasses out. The cast iron pot from my parents' house, the one my grandmother had brought from her own mother's house, that I had carefully carried home on a plane and placed on the shelf above the stove, being used to make a pasta sauce. When her friend asked whose pot it was, Nadia said, "Oh, it's just one from the kitchen," with the ease of someone for whom the objects in this home are resources, unowned, available. That was the night I stopped waiting for the right moment and started building toward it. I went upstairs. I sat at my desk in the bedroom, and I typed up everything. Every entry, dated, specific, exact. 9 pages. I emailed it to myself from the private account. I sat for a moment with the document open, and I read it straight through, start to finish. The way you read something you need to see whole, rather than in pieces.
I want to pause and ask you something. Have you ever had to be two different people at the same table? The one everyone sees and the one quietly building something solid underneath it? Have you ever smiled during a dinner and thought, I know exactly where this ends, and you don't, and that is the only advantage I need? Tell me in the comments. And please subscribe if you haven't, because Thursday evening is coming, and what happened in my living room is the part I have been working toward this entire time. Thursday was the 40th day. I had chosen a Thursday deliberately, not a weekend when the emotional temperature of the house ran higher and everything felt more loaded. Not a Monday when Marcus came home already depleted by the week's first demands. Thursday. Midweek, post-dinner, the hour when the dishes are done and the day has settled into something manageable, and people are, briefly, willing to think clearly. I asked Nadia to give Marcus and me the evening. I said it warmly, the way I had said everything for 40 days. I said I thought we needed some time, just the two of us, to sit and talk about some things I'd had on my mind. She took her laptop and went to the second bedroom without asking questions, which was the first cooperative thing she had done in 6 weeks, and I did not find it reassuring. Marcus and I sat in the living room. He was on the sofa. I was in the green wingback, which I had moved back to its correct corner the previous Tuesday, quietly, without comment, as a small, deliberate act of reclamation that no one had acknowledged. I had the folder on my lap, 9 pages, printed that morning at the office. The Declaration of Trust, clipped to the back. Notes from both my conversations with Helena and Patricia Osei, in my own handwriting, on index cards I had kept in my coat pocket for a week.
I need to show you something, I said. I need you to read it before we talk. He looked at the folder. He looked at my face. He is not, in his best moments, unintelligent about the weight of situations. And I think he understood in that moment that the folder was the consequence of a long patience he had not fully known I was practicing. He took it. I watched him read. He reads the way engineers read, systematically, without expression, going back to reread when something doesn't parse. He went through the 9 pages in about 15 minutes. Nadia's show was playing upstairs, muffled through the ceiling. The lamp I had moved back to its corner threw its warm light across the room and the chair and the bookshelves where my books were arranged in their own order again, because I had spent a quiet hour the previous Sunday putting them back. He set the pages down on the cushion beside him. He looked at the middle distance for a moment, and then he looked at me. The pot, he said. just those 2 words. He had, I think, recognized the pot. "Your grandmother brought it from her mother's house," I said. "I carried it home on a plane. It was being used for a dinner party for people I don't know, and when someone asked whose it was, Nadia said it was just one from the kitchen." He put his hand over his mouth. This is something he does when he is genuinely distressed, not when he is defensive, and I have learned the difference. His shoulders dropped. "She gave someone a key to our home," I said. I kept my voice even. I had been practicing this for 40 days, and the practice had worked in the way practice always works, not by removing the emotion, but by giving it somewhere precise to go. "Marcus, I am not asking you to choose between me and your sister. I am asking you to read what has happened in this house for 40 days and tell me honestly, is this what you intended when you said yes?" He was quiet for a long time. The show upstairs played on. "I didn't think it would go like this," he said. His voice was low. "She was going through something, and you were dealing with your dad, and I didn't want to add." "You didn't want to add to my stress," I said. "So you made a unilateral decision about our home, allowed the situation to extend past the threshold set out in our declaration of trust without my consent, and for 40 days, you chose not to notice that I was watching all of it, writing all of it down, and saying nothing while I waited for you to act." I paused. "I am not angry about the situation, Marcus. I am clear about it. Those are different things." He looked at the folder again. I reached in and placed the Declaration of Trust on the cushion beside him, open to the relevant page. I had marked the passage with a paperclip. I put my finger on the paragraph. "This is the agreement we signed when we bought this house," I said. "This is the section about occupancy decisions. I spoke with Patricia Osei 3 weeks ago. I have a call scheduled with her for Friday morning if that becomes necessary." I removed my finger from the page. I would prefer that it not become necessary. He stared at the paragraph. He stared at it for a long time. The way you stare at a thing when you are reading it, but also understanding, simultaneously, something much larger than what the words say. His jaw worked. His hands were very still. Then he looked up at me with an expression I had not seen on his face in 9 years of knowing him. Not shame, not hurt, not anger. Recognition. The clear, unhedged recognition of someone seeing a picture they had been carefully keeping out of focus, now brought, without mercy or cruelty, into sharpness. "She needs to be gone by the end of the month," I said. "That is 17 days. I am not asking for a quick exit that humiliates her. I am asking for a clear end date and a real plan for what comes after it. And I need to hear that plan from you tonight." He nodded, slowly. The nod of someone who understands that this is not negotiable and has decided, at last, not to negotiate it. "I'll talk to her tomorrow," he said. "Thank you," I said. We sat in the living room for a while after that, not talking. The lamp was on. The books were in their places. My chair was in its corner. I picked up the novel I had been meaning to read for 6 weeks, and I found my page. And I read 3 paragraphs, and I did not retain any of them. But that was all right. I was simply there, in my home, in my chair. And for the first time in 40 days, the room felt the right size. I have to ask you something while we're here. Have you ever had to show someone who genuinely loves you, the evidence of what their avoidance has cost? Have you ever had to make visible the thing they had been choosing not to see? Tell me in the comments. I read everyone. And subscribe if you haven't, because the end of this story is not the end of the story.
Nadia leaving was only the beginning of something else.
Nadia left on a Sunday afternoon at the end of March. She had found a room in a shared house about 20 minutes from us, a place she had found herself, with a deposit she had managed herself, which I thought was significant, and said so, genuinely, when she told me. She packed the 2 original suitcases and the 2 boxes of things that had arrived since. The plants, both of them, the fiddle leaf fig and the pothos, and the new lamp. She left the hook she had screwed into the window frame, which Marcus later removed and filled and painted over on a Saturday afternoon, without being asked. She hugged Marcus for a long time in the hallway. I gave them the space for it. Whatever had been complicated about those 6 weeks, and it had been genuinely complicated, a tangle of real love and real need, and a real unwillingness to see where her needs ended and other people's homes began, Marcus was still her brother, and she still loved him. And I did not want to be the person who stood in the foreground of that moment. She looked at me before she went out to the car. A look I had not seen from her before. Not quite warm, not quite sorry, but something in the territory between them. The look of someone encountering an edge they had not believed was there until they touched it. "Thank you for not making this worse than it needed to be," she said. It was a strange thing to thank someone for, but I understood what she meant, and I think it was genuine. And I said, "Take care of yourself, Nadia." And I meant it. You can mean things that coexist with other things you also mean. She drove away. I went inside. I moved the reading chair back 3 inches to where it had been before. I rehung my coat on the hook behind the bedroom door. I took my grandmother's pot from the back of the wardrobe and put it back on the shelf above the stove, where it belonged. The first weekend alone felt like opening a window in a room you hadn't realized had been closed. Marcus and I didn't do anything significant. We slept late on Saturday, we made a slow breakfast and left the plates, and went for a long walk, and came back and read in the same room in the afternoon. Both of us quiet. Both of us returned to ourselves in a way that required no announcement. We did not immediately discuss what had happened. Some things need to settle before they can be examined. And we were both, I think, grateful enough to be cautious about pressing on anything too soon. The examination came later. It came over many evenings, in conversations that were sometimes difficult and sometimes surprisingly easy, and in the couples therapy we started in June. Not as a last resort, but as a deliberate choice by 2 people who understood they had something worth maintaining carefully. Our therapist has a gift for asking the question that lands in the center of things. In our 3rd session, she looked at Marcus and said, "Tell me the last time you told your sister no, and meant it, and didn't spend the following week managing her response to it." He was silent for a long time. "I'm not sure I have," he said. "That's the place we start," she said. He has been doing that work. It is not dramatic work. It does not look significant from the outside. It looks like not immediately returning a call. It looks like saying, "That doesn't work for us this weekend," and not rebuilding the sentence into something softer. It looks like, at Christmas, telling Nadia gently but clearly that she was welcome for Christmas Day dinner, and that we would not be taking in her college friend, who had nowhere to go, because our home was not a hostel, and we had not been consulted. Small things, all of them. But the consistency of small things is how you change the shape of something that has been the same shape for a very long time. Nadia and I have what I would describe as a functional and slowly improving relationship. She comes to dinner once a month, sometimes less. She has stopped borrowing things without asking. She has, in the past 6 months, started asking questions about my work and my life in a way that suggests she has recently discovered I have one,
which I find more funny than bitter. She called me last month to ask whether I thought a particular lease agreement had a problem in one of its clauses, because she knew I worked in compliance. And I read it and told her what I saw, and she said thank you. And we talked for 20 minutes about things unrelated to Marcus, which was new. We are not close. I do not expect we will become close in the way that some sisters-in-law do. But we are building something honest between us. And I have found, in the year since, that I value honesty more than warmth when I have to choose between them. Warmth can be performed. Honesty is structural.
My reading chair is in its corner. My grandmother's pot is on its shelf. The Edinburgh sweater is on its hook. The books are in their order on the shelf between the photograph from our 5th anniversary and the small framed print I bought in a market in Lisbon the year before we were married. The house smells like coffee in the mornings and the hyacinths from the front garden when the windows are open. It is mine. It has always been mine. I think about something Helena said to me the morning after the Thursday conversation, when I called her to tell her what had happened. She said, "You built the case first, and then you made the argument. That's why it worked. Most people skip the first part." When someone begins to occupy that space, as though your presence in it is optional, they are not helping themselves at the expense of no one. They are helping themselves at your expense. And you are allowed to see that, to name it, to document it, to act. You do not have to be loud to be unmovable. You do not have to be cruel to be clear. You do not have to burn anything down to reclaim what was always yours. Sometimes you only have to sit in your own chair, in the corner where the light falls correctly, and put the truth between yourself and the person who had decided you wouldn't. I had always been paying attention. The difference was that now everyone knew it. I have 3 questions for you, and I mean all of them. First, have you ever had to reclaim something that was being taken from you so slowly you almost didn't notice? Second, is there someone in your life right now treating your patience as though it were an inexhaustible resource? And third, if you could say one thing to the version of yourself who was still adjusting instead of acting, what would you say? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one, and I respond when I can. If any part of this story gave you something you needed today, permission or recognition, or just the feeling that someone understands, please share it with someone who might need to hear it. Subscribe if you haven't. Take care of your house, and I will see you in the next one.